The information provided is not a substitute for legal and other professional advice where the facts and circumstances warrant. People should always consult their own legal or other professional advisors and discuss the facts and circumstances that apply to their specific circumstances. The information shared on Ask the Landlord is for educational purposes only.
Hi there! We're back with another episode of Ask the Landlord with our favorite landlord, Albert Dweck. I'm Melissa. I'm one of Albert's producers and a former New York, Pittsburgh, Lafayette, Louisiana, and Washington, D.C. renter. And together, we're going to be asking this landlord some questions. If you want to be involved on this podcast and you have a question for Albert, call us and leave us a voicemail on the Ask the Landlord hotline. That number is 646-580-3015. How's it going today, Albert?
It's going well, Melissa. How's it going?
It's going great. And I think we're going to ask you a question that your experience is going to help you answer. And I hope it's going to help other people. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right. I want to know, what are some important tasks I can do as a homeowner as to upkeep my home? I'm talking regular maintenance one should be doing. And does that apply to renters as well? Or is that a whole nother category?
Yeah, it's a good question, Melissa. I think it does apply to renters as well. I think it applies to everyone living in a home. I think that there are certain things that need regular maintenance. I think, for example, your dryer vent.
Ooh.
You're a homeowner. You got to be cleaning out your dryer vent because it could cause a fire, So you're like, oh, I need to make like a list of things like that. And what's the cadence of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that we used to do, and I do with my buildings and my house, I used to do, is I used to have like a sewer clean out guy. So what happens is people flush things down the toilet or the drain that shouldn't be flushed down the drain, and that gets backed up sometimes. So what I've in my experience as a landlord, it's like, oh, all of a sudden you'll have a problem with the sewer line is backed up, and you're like, I don't want, and then it's causing a backup in the house or in the apartment, and I don't want to have that problem. So what I did was I got like a regular, like every 90 days, I have the sewer guy come and clean out the sewers, and they have a thing, so you could pay them in advance for like a service, and you're like, oh, it does that. They come every 3 months, and it's much cheaper than them coming when you have an emergency, and it's also cheaper, obviously, than the damage caused by something like that. So, you gotta anticipate things like that. Your smoke detector batteries, you're checking them. I know these days they have smoke detectors and it's carbon monoxide detectors that you don't have to charge or whatever, but you generally want to have like a schedule of how you change the batteries if there are batteries, or how you change the smoke detectors if there are those, because very often people will put them in and never look at them again. I'm like, but you got to put it on your calendar. Like,
that's a good point.
How do you do that? Your heating system, before the heating season, you sort of want to make sure that it's going to be okay. Not when you get to the heating system or your air conditioning. You're like, oh, it's July and I'm hot and the thing's not working. I'm like, you could have checked that in. Now, the problem with doing this in July, or for your your air conditioning, or your heating in December, is that everybody has that problem,
right?
At the same time. So you were like, let me check, make sure everything's working in 2 months before, so that I'm in good shape when the season comes and I don't have to, have an emergency when I need it.
Air filters also is a good one.
Someone told me about that yesterday. Someone was in my office, said, Albert, I have a tenant and they wanted me to change the water filter in the refrigerator. Whose responsibility is that?
That's a good question.
I'm like, well, I think it's if it's unspoken, meaning if it's unsaid, Specifically, it's really, and the tenant is using the refrigerator how it's supposed to be used. It's the landlord's responsibility to take. That's my experience.
Ooh, we bought those.
However, if it's in the lease, like that, you have to replace that as a tenant. You should, now this is something that if you're renting to somebody, or if you're a homeowner, or if you're a renter, you want to kind of figure out, hey, this HVAC system has a filter. Who's supposed to replace that? You should know. I'm telling you now, right? Like, how often?
When we were in Pittsburgh, we did everything ourselves. But I didn't even think to ask the landlord for a new water filter
Or a new
or
air
the
conditioning
AC filters.
filter,
I didn't.
or who's going to clean the dryer vent.
No one did that. These
Right?
are really important little things that, they could be called slippers. Like they slip through the cracks and you don't think about them. We should write a manual for everyone out there because the
Yeah.
carbon monoxide one is so important. My husband's been researching and he wants to spend a lot on these smart they're smart home ones. And they're great because then they'll send a notice to your phone. But you have to.
There are new smart home things now also with leaks. Have you seen that?
With a leak? I don't know. I have to ask a
So
friend.
my someone I know, and this is a new thing, I'll tell you.
Okay.
Their insurance, they bought a new house, and they called me and they said, like, Al, the insurance company wants me to install leak detectors. And I have to show them proof that I have them installed. And I said, that's a new one.
This is new.
So I said, okay. And it's not a big deal, but they want you to now. So we talked about the sump pump in an earlier episode, but as an example, you could, there are areas that like, let's say next to your boiler, if a pipe breaks or something in the basement, you could have a flood without knowing about it, right? If you're away, or a pipe, let's say the weather is very cold, which we'll talk about also in a second, that you're making me think of, is that, but you could put a little thing that notifies you on your cell phone if there's a leak and shuts the water.
Oh my goodness.
Now your insurance company is concerned because they spend less by putting like a $40 thing. They saving thousands of dollars, right, of not having to pay. So those are things that are interesting today. To your point, where you could have, you could have it on your phone. You could have an alert system or something that shuts the water. So now you're probably going to look into that. So
I'm writing it down.
You should. So leak detection system.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of key places that you would put it, like on your water main or something like that.
Yeah, near a washer dryer, washer.
Something that happens that you and I should discuss, which has happened to me and people that I know. And you're not going to know this until you know it. I'm telling you now. Okay, It's very important. So let's say you're in the Northeast, and it gets very cold, and all of a sudden your water stops working.
Oh no.
Why did that happen? Because your pipes froze.
Oh boy. So how do we fix it? What do we do?
Does anybody know? I mean, water actually expands when it freezes.
Right. Ice.
So that breaks the pipes.
Crack.
So now what happens is, so let's say you're in a house and it's very, very cold, like 0 degrees outside. And all of a sudden the water stops working because the pipes are frozen. And then now you're like, oh, okay, I'll just wait for it to unfreeze. But what really happens very often is that the water inside the pipe that froze breaks the pipe.
Sounds terrible.
Now,
how do we avoid this?
Now imagine this, which really happens, that you went to Florida for a week in the winter, and it got super cold, and you're like so happy that you're not in the cold weather, but your house is at home, and your water's not working, your pipes froze, and then all of a sudden it unfroze and it broke, and your house is destroyed because of a water pipe burst. You're like, how do I? So you have to think about. You have to add. You have to know where your pipes are. Make sure that they're insulated from the cold. Those are things you should check. Like you brought it up. You're like, how do I? Well, you could check that. We have a house, for example, that we don't go to in the winter sometimes, so we drain the pipes, winterize.
Meaning you turn them off? You turn off the
We
water?
turn off the water and drain the pipes so that there's no water in the pipes.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's an old house, so the pipes were like on the outside, more not insulated as they should in the walls.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it gets really cold. So I have someone that I know. Also, there's ways to, like, you could look it up on the internet. You could leave the water trickling a little bit, things
Dripping,
like that
that's
when
what
it's
I've
very
heard.
right, so that it stays a little warmer. But those are things you have to think about, like what happens in extreme weather, hot or cold.
Would you keep your heat on in the house if you leave?
Yes.
To
Yes, I would keep it on to there's, a 55 degrees or certain minimums. But
Okay.
then again, so you should look into that, like what makes sense to do, because you would make sure that the house is not freezing for those reasons, like things break in extreme temperatures. But then again, let's say you had the house at 60, for
Mm-hmm.
example, the heat. So you're like, oh, I'm saving money because I'm leaving the house on 60. That's fine, but that might work for where. So let's just reality game, right? So your heat detector, let's say Alan, right, has you're looking at your phone,
Mm-hmm.
and these days, right, you could control your heat
Of
from your phone.
course.
Let's
Right.
just say. So the temperature gauge for the heat is somewhere, let's say, in the kitchen,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that controls, let's say, the whole house. But that's in the middle of the house, the kitchen heat thermometer thing. So that's only telling you the temperature in that room at that time.
Mm-hmm.
But let's say you have a room that's further away from that, that's really cold because it gets drafty, or it's next to a porch. That's a whole different thing. You
Mm-hmm.
don't know the temperature in that room.
Uh-oh.
So you have to think about that.
Definitely. Now I got to get a nest in every room.
But, so also it's important to understand, like, how is that working? How does the heat work off of that thing?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, I was in buildings where the guy, they put a thermometer that controls the heat, but the thermometer was like in the boiler room. So it was too hot all the time. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, you have to realize how the systems in your home work so that they're going to work most efficiently,
Mm-hmm.
and to protect yourself against such things, extreme weather. What happens to your house in the snow? What if there's 2 feet of snow?
Right.
Do you have a roof? How does the snow sit on the roof?
The
Where does the
gutters.
water go? Are the gutters cleaned out?
Right. I know. A
What
lot of
happens
maintenance.
in the fall?
With the
Let's say you have trees on your property over your roof. The leaves go into the gutters, and then the gutters get clogged. They don't drain. You didn't clean them out. Then it snows or rains. Then it snows. It freezes, and you're like, it's not draining right. It's not supposed to be draining this way. You're causing problems that you didn't know you had. So those are things that you want to make sure that the systems you have are working the way they're supposed to work, and that they're being maintained in a way that they can work when you're not there.
Mm-hmm.
So being proactive and thinking through those things are very important.
Yeah. Another thing about
Doing it
snow.
in advance also, Melissa, because you got
Definitely.
to remind yourself, like, oh, it's going to be cold and I want to make sure that the heat's working, or it's going to be hot, I want to make sure the air conditioning's working. Do that before the whole world does it.
Yeah, that's off season. Take care of it off season. But another really quick anecdote is decks. So we looked at a house that had a deck, like a wooden deck on the outside. And I was like, I have no idea about decks. Is this maintained well? And so I started doing all my research. And I think if you're renting, that's a really good communication to have with your landlord of, do I have to shovel the snow off this deck right away? Are you going to seal it and clean it once a year like it's supposed to? Because that's a safety issue at that
And then you
point.
put that into the lease, ideally, or
Yeah.
have an understanding about how that's going to work and put it in
Yeah.
writing so you could refer back to it.
But it's something, again, just everything look out for, do your research, use the internet, ask your fellow landlords, ask the podcast.
I think prepare, anticipate, do things before they become a problem, proactive,
Mm-hmm.
what do you say, preventative maintenance. Those are things.
Definitely.
Yeah.
All right. That was great. I have to look up leak detectors, and then I also have to look up how to drain my pipes. That's something I need to look up. So thank you so much, Albert. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
For more episodes, please subscribe to Ask the Landlord on your favorite podcast platform. We'd appreciate it if you left a review on Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to watch the show, check out our Ask the Landlord YouTube channel. If you have a question for Albert, feel free to contact him on Instagram at Ask the Landlord and check out his TikTok at Ask the Landlord. Bridging the gap between landlords and tenants, this has been Ask the Landlord. Thanks for listening.